home and made it into a campaign headquarters. And every weekend, I had 20, 25 people working for me for free and knocking on doors. They knocked, I think, anywhere from between 6,000 to 8,000 doors. Anyway, all that being said, by the time the election happened, I won the race by a margin of 114 votes out of 11,800 votes cast. So it was an extremely narrow margin of victory. I mean, from the time the polls closed, I was leading by 49 votes, and I was leading by 60 votes, I was leading by 70 votes, and by the time the evening finished, by 10 o'clock, the race was closed, and I mean, the polls had closed, and all the precincts had reported, and I had won by 114 votes. So, so that's where I am. I am the first Muslim elected in New Mexico, first Asian American elected in New Mexico, and it's truly an honor and a privilege to be doing this work. I thoroughly enjoy it. It's amazing because running the race is something else. You're focusing on 3 or 4 issues. They're very local, and you're pretty familiar with that. Jazakallah khair. So, once again. Do not eat biryani before you speak. It sucks the water out of your mouth. So, anyway, I finished, and the landscape when you're sitting in the chamber is completely different. You have to deal with the most trivial issues to the most vital issues for the state. As you know, New Mexico is not a very forward state. We are pretty backward. We are very low in population. We have a high jobless rate. For the last 8 years, we had a Republican governor who decimated the state, pretty much killed every state agency. So our task was monumental. We had to rebuild every agency. We had to put new life into the government. So our task was pretty enormous. Our state budget is only $7.2 billion, but it's a very complicated budget. In fact, the tax bill, which is the second bill we passed this year, the first bill is to allow us to function as a legislative body. So that's what we call the feed bill. That's the very first thing we enact the very first day so that we can function as a legislature. The second bill is the tax bill. It's 700 pages long, so it's practically impossible to read everything, so we just skim through it, look at the places that are of interest to us and make sure those pass. Besides that, I think, you know, when you sit there, you realize the enormity of the responsibility you've been given, because suddenly you have jumped from a very local district to a statewide seat. And you have to balance the needs of your community, your own personal convictions, your religious convictions, and what your constituents demand, which may not be matched at all at any time. So it is a big responsibility. So that being said, I'd like to share with you what is necessary. I think we as Muslims need to assert our identity, assert our presence, and I think each one of us should take on the responsibility of doing outreach and dawah to our community. Not everybody should become a politician, but I think the younger children, the younger generation should get involved, and one of the best ways to do that is to look for internships. You can also, I don't know how the legislature here works, but in New Mexico, we do have shadows. So a young person will sit with me on the floor and basically go through the entire day to learn how this process works. That is a very good education. I think that is the first step which a young person should do, is to familiarize themselves and make them feel comfortable in that environment. So you go in, you shadow a senator or representative, and you learn what the environment is. That's a good place to start. And another thing that I really seriously want you to consider is, we automatically assume that if you are an engineer or a doctor or some other technical professional, you are automatically excluded from the political arena. That is entirely not true. In fact, we need engineers, we need doctors in the political process, especially in the legislature, because there are two specific reasons for that. As I said earlier, we are trained to think logically, and we are trained to think in a structured manner. That is a great asset. In fact, a lot of the processes that exist now in our legislatures have all been drawn up by attorneys. That is fine because there's a deep degree of legal aspect in this. But I think engineers and doctors bring a different level of logic and organization and structure to this process. So I encourage even those who are going into technical degrees to consider a political involvement. I think this would benefit all of us. It will benefit not just the Muslim community, it will benefit the larger community. I'm the only practicing engineer among 70 legislators. New Mexico elects 70 representatives and 42 senators. I am one of 70, and I believe I am the only practicing engineer. There are two more engineers, but they are not really practicing. But there is one MD, and I can tell the difference when we are debating healthcare, when we are debating the likelihood that Obamacare will go away and the state will have to fund its own medical insurance programs. His knowledge as a doctor is extremely valuable because we approach it from a legal side, but he tells us what is practical. He might say, yeah, you think this would work, but as a practicing doctor, this would be the worst possible thing you can do. So it balances that and allows us to pass a much more defensible, a much more practical bill or a law. So that is very important, and I would really encourage that. I would also strongly recommend that each one of you become familiar with your state's constitution. That is extremely important. I carry my own copy of the Constitution with me all the time because every aspect of the legislative process is spelled out in the state constitution. And if you're not familiar with the Constitution, then you really don't know what you're doing. So reading the Constitution is very important. In fact, my Constitution for New Mexico was written in 1911, and we've practically not changed it even to this day. And we are way overdue to do that. And inshallah, next year I plan to introduce a bill to make some major modifications to the way we operate our legislature, because we only have a 60-day legislative process in every odd year, which was this year in 2019, and in even year, we meet only for 30 days. And there's no conceivable way I can run a state given only a 60-day time window to pass laws. So I'm going to change that. I know I have a lot of support for it. Inshallah, next year I'll write a bill to change that to extend our time. But that was written in 1911. And your state constitution was written in 1878, I think. 76. Mashallah, I'm impressed. So, February 15, 1876. So, your constitution, you need to be very familiar with it. And as I said, every legislative process and every step is driven by the Constitution. In fact, in your Constitution, there's not a religious test, but it requires that you acknowledge the existence of a supreme being, which every Muslim qualifies for that. So you have already passed the first test. So you are eligible from day one to be a legislator in Texas. And another thing is, this is not a money-making process. In fact, this is a huge money-losing process, because as a state legislator in New Mexico, I'm not paid a single penny. This was written, I'm the only state in the country which does not pay its senators or representatives. So all my friends who are in business think I'm totally crazy, because this is not a proposition where you go to make money. I have to raise my own money. I have to conduct my own campaigns. I pay my own staff, and yet I'm not reimbursed for anything. So this is pure public service. We call it citizen legislature, but I think it's a process that's kind of overdue to be overhauled. But I think your state does pay you, so you are much better off, and of course Texas is a much richer state. So that, that's pretty much the end of my talk, and I'll be glad to take your questions. Yes, sir.
When you ran for the office, what was the first question the non-Muslim was asking?
That's a very good point. In fact, do not let religion become any aspect of your campaign. You are a US citizen. If you are a Christian, you're not questioned about your religion. So if you're a Muslim, why should you be questioned about your religion? So do not let religion enter into this debate at all. In fact, you're neither less patriotic nor more patriotic. You're just a US citizen. You're going to run for an office and serve to the best of your capability, just like your Christian counterpart. So do not let religion come into it. If you knock on a door and religion becomes an issue, just walk away. Do not argue the point. You're not going to win that debate, because the person who's asking the question wants to put you down. So don't even engage. Just walk away. The same thing, for me, it was pro-life or pro-choice. If a person at the door asks that question, just state that I have my own opinions, I'm going to vote my conscience or my constituency, and I don't want to engage in this conversation. You're not going to win that vote anyway. So yeah, don't let religion. In fact, I'm truly blessed because New Mexico is a very multicultural community, and I was never questioned about mine. There was only one instance where a person said, I've read your scriptures, your God is not my God. And I immediately said, I disagree, but this is not the issue I want to debate with you right now. Here's my card, please call me after the elections. And that was it. You just walk away.
Was there anything raised in the House after the New Zealand shootings that occurred?
Yes, there was a huge outpouring of support after the New Zealand shooting, because we had just debated the gun bills. So obviously this is an issue of gun violence. So yes, I did speak on the floor, and if you're not bored, I'll play a clip of what I said if you want to listen to that. Let's see.
Business, announcements, and miscellaneous business.
Seeing no objection, it is so ordered. Gentleman from Bernalillo, Representative Akil.
You want to?
Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, I stand today with sadness. This is the last full day we have for our gathering here in this chamber. The news coming out of New Zealand is heartbreaking. No person
I'm sorry.
in the place of worship. These terrorist attacks on Muslims are unacceptable and run contrary to our values as human beings. The purpose of faith is to find peace and fulfillment, not to spread hatred and bigotry. We must strive to be examples of tolerance in all we do. We must strive to be the light in the darkness. My heart is with those affected in New Zealand, and today I will join my fellow New Mexicans to mourn the loss. Mr. Speaker, I'll also add just a little bit of detail here. A Muslim place of worship does not have any furniture. There are no pews, there are no benches. There's one person who leads a prayer. We sit on the ground and we pray just like Jesus did in the Garden of Gethsemane. He bows to the ground, he takes off his shoes, and he bows to the ground and prays to the Lord. That's what we do every Friday in the afternoon. So men, women, children gather in an empty hall, and they're led in prayer. So when this terrorist attacked, there was no place for them to run. It's an open hall, and as they tried to leave from the main entrance, they were pretty much mowed down. So this is what happens when you open this hatred against a minority or a particular group based on their faith or their religion. Then these attacks are unpredictable. Larger communities among the Muslim community are more prepared to handle this, but I fear for the small community. So I'm going to join them today for prayer. So if you'll excuse me, from 1 to 2 o'clock, the mayor of Santa Fe has graciously agreed to be there to offer comfort. There'll be some rabbis there, and there'll also be a police presence to just assure them that they are safe. But this is a warning. This is sadly the reality of the world we live in. And these can happen anytime. But what happens in a Muslim prayer of worship is very vulnerable. So I thank you for your consideration and for the sympathy of all. I know the Senate has observed a moment of silence, and thank you very much. This was actually unfolding as we were debating last night, and I was getting tweets. So this was happening at 3 a.m., between 2 and 3 a.m. our time. But we were involved in our debate, so I didn't interrupt or mention anything. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, gentlemen. I think I speak for the entire body when we express our extreme sadness and condolences to the victims. And I'd like to ask the members of the House and members of the public in the gallery to please rise so we can observe a moment of silence and reflection.
There's a Jewish representative who also speaks after this.
Thank you. The gentleman from Bernalillo and Sandoval.
Mr. Speaker, if I could, I would also like to be excused to join my friend and colleague who in similar moments with the Jewish community has expressed his sympathy and support, and I would like to be there with him very much. And if you would excuse the both of us that we could attend that, it would be appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, and my gentle friend, thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from San Juan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too rise. This is a...
After that, the Republican side also got up, and one of the Republicans accompanied me to the Santa Fe Masjid. Santa Fe is a very small community, much smaller than Albuquerque. So we all went there and prayed with them, which was very nice. So, alhamdulillah. Yes, brother. Wa alaikum salam.
Elections in other states, but also I don't know how many
inshallah.
Winning elections?
Yes.
And also, do you think of some sort of connection between you all, like in terms of representatives from different states, maybe promoting the same cause or, expressing a position to certain issues like the BDS movement and things like that? I don't know what you thought.
So I think that's a really good point. I had not thought about it, but I believe there are 10, not even 10, 100 Muslims who ran this year. And of course, the most visible is Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar in US Congress at the federal level. But I think we need to form a coalition at the state levels and coordinate our thinking on that. I'll try to do that. I'm sure there's some organizations like the Muslim Political Action Committee which can coordinate it, because I know that we have legislative training sessions that are conducted on a selective basis. I'm going for 2 of them this year. I think we should do the same thing for the Muslim community, which we not only coordinate among those that are already elected, but invite the aspiring youngsters to come and join us so we can share our experiences and mentor them or guide them so that they are better prepared for this. We were not. As I said, I'm an accidental politician. But if we do this in a coordinated manner, I think this must be done. Because, inshallah, as Muslims, this is our dawah. Yes.
I moved from Massachusetts 7 months ago. It's called Jetpack.
Really? Okay.
They really train young graduates from politics.
Really? Okay. I'm not aware of them at all. If you can give me some details. In Boston? MashaAllah. That's good. I'm glad that it exists, and we should do more, but I'll definitely like to get more detail on that.
A quick question.
Yeah.
You said that you're the only engineer, practicing engineer. How do you balance, I assume it's a full-time job?
You have to pretty much put everything on hold. So my projects are on hold right now. I had promised I'd go back on the 16th of March, the day the legislation session finished, but I was not able to do that. It's going to be pretty tough because I have 24,000 constituents and my phone number is out there. I answer my phones personally, and to give you a magnitude of what you're committing to, just on one bill alone, I had over 2,400 emails, and I wrote 30 bills, and the House altogether wrote 680 bills, out of which the governor has signed 310 bills. And each one of them has its own, pros and cons. So it's going to be hard. I do know that those of my colleagues who practice law and all, they pretty much put everything on hold. It's just not possible. For 60 days, I did not even know, mashallah, you really need the full support of your household. My wife ran the show at home. I had no idea what was happening. I did not know how much groceries there were in the house, nothing. You come home, sleep for 4 hours, and you drive back to Santa Fe. So yeah, it is a huge commitment. I don't think you can support a profession, especially if it's a full-time legislature, then you just cannot. Okay, thank you so much for your attention. Alhamdulillah, thank you. It's an honor and privilege to be doing this. Shukriya.
Congratulations.
Thank you, brother.
Inshallah, Mabarak, make it easy. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Very nice meeting, inshallah. Hopefully you plan for the federal level, inshallah.
Oh,
How long you are here, sir?
I'm leaving Tuesday.
On Tuesday, because we are going to arrange a meeting on Tuesday, so I was thinking if we can spare some time, but
Yeah.
let me try.